So today we are going to pick up. So where we stopped at last week, Habakkuk questioned God. Y'all remember that? Habakkuk asked God some questions. Why does evil seem like it's winning? Here in our nation, it seems like the law has no effect. It seems like the rich are taking advantage of the poor. It seems like justice has been polluted. He's asking God, why? Why does evil always seem to be winning? And we got a part of God's response where we stopped at last week. But we left off where God had responded to Habakkuk saying, watch and see what I will be doing. And we know that God had told him he was going to raise up the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are the Babylonians. And so I wanted to jump right into chapter number 2, but I want to pick up where Habakkuk now in turn responds back to God's response. All right, this is verse number 12. So Habakkuk asks a question in verses 1 through 4. God responds to him in verses 5 through 11. Now in the first chapter, verse number 12, Habakkuk now responds back to God in response to what God said to him. All right, so it's kind of like a dialogue. It says, I'm reading out of the King James Version. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment or for chastening. Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. So it's him. I understand that you're going to use them as your instrument of chastening for us. But thou art pure of eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devour the man that is more righteous than he? In other words, how can you be a just God and let these evil men come and overtake us who are righteous and make men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice unto their net and burn incense unto their drag, because by them their portion is fat and their meat plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? I'm going to go right one verse into chapter number 2. Then he says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. So basically, what Habakkuk is saying to God, he's saying, God, how can you let this nation that does not regard you take over us who are your people? How can you let this evil nation take over the righteous nation? Then he says, when he talks about the net, he's basically saying, God, they praise their instruments of doom. They praise their instruments. So he uses, when he says fish, he's talking about people. And when he says net, he's talking about their traps. And he's saying they praise their own traps. They praise their own schemes. They praise the things that they do to destroy other nations. They don't give you praise. God, how can you allow this? And so first, let me start by saying that I first want to point out that God initially responds to Habakkuk. And why do I like that? Because it shows the intimacy of their relationship. Bible study is all about getting you to enhance your relationship with God. And the thing I love about it is that God, who is the creator of the universe, takes time to respond to a man. And it shows the closeness of relationship. And this is the blessing of relationship. When you have relationship, God gives you revelation. He reveals what it is that he's going to do. And so the difference with those who live with me, say my children, we have a difference in relationship of closeness as to the people who see me on the day-to-day, on a regular day-to-day basis. Why? Because my kids know what I'm going to do for that day, whereas the people on the outside can just see me as I go about doing it. Yeah. And so it's the same way with God. When you have relationship with God, he gives you revelation. And so then you know things that are going to happen before other people know that they're going to happen, because you have relationship with God. When you have relationship, he reveals things to you. And I don't want to stay there too long, but I do want to stress that God gives Habakkuk a revelation. He lets him in on what he's going to do. Now, get this. God responds to Habakkuk, but it's not the response that Habakkuk was ready for. And I want to point that out, that sometimes when God responds to your questions, he may not give you the answer that you are ready to receive. I want you to get that. Sometimes you pray a prayer, and I tell people, I teach people, you can go to God with your questions, but I want you to get that God, he may respond with a response that you don't want to hear. And this is probably another reason why people say don't question God. I think that you should, but you got to understand that sometimes God won't tell you exactly what you want to hear. He said, when we talked about, God said to Habakkuk, he said, I'm going to do something that you wouldn't believe even if I told you. Why? Because what God was going to do is he was going to allow the enemy nation to come and be his instrument of judgment on the people who were righteous. And it seems very unfair. God, how could you let the evil men come and destroy us who are righteous? He was not ready for that, because God is a just God. And you would think that if God was going to punish someone, he would use someone righteous to punish someone who was less righteous. Y'all get what I'm saying? Habakkuk says, God, this is not fair. How, God? How? He brings his concerns to God about moral and spiritual conditions of his people to ask God why evil was allowed to prevail over good, and then God responds that he is going to chasten the nation by using an evil and arrogant nation, and he questions God's way of chastening. And I want you to understand this, that sometimes you can do something against God, or you can be going the wrong way, and God can use any means of chastening. Sometimes listen, I'm gonna tell y'all a personal story. I will never forget this. One time I was walking outside the will of God. And I left my truck parked at a certain place. And I knew I was living outside of the will of God. And God allowed people to break into my truck. And I was so livid. I was so mad. I was so upset. I got to my truck and I realized my chain was gone. My glove box was busted open. My middle console was open. And I'm sitting there in the car making the police report, upset with God that why, God, would you let the evil prevail over the righteous? I was asking the same question. God, how could you allow these people to break in my truck? How, God, is this right? How this? How that? Why, God? Why, God? And then God brought to my mind exactly what he says to Habakkuk, that sometimes what you think I'm going to do to punish you is not what I'm going to do to punish you. I allowed those evil men to break into your truck, Marcus, because you need to pay attention to how you live in your life. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Sometimes God will allow the evil to prevail over the right. And I want you to get this. When you're walking in God's favor and he allows the enemy to attack you, it's a test of your faith, because ultimately God always makes you triumph over your enemies. But I want you to pay attention to this, because what God says that he's going to do with the Chaldeans, he is going to allow them to get victory over his people. Now, when you're walking in God's righteousness, He'll allow the enemy to attack. He'll allow the weapon to be formed, but no weapon formed will prosper when you're walking according to his principles. Now, when you walk outside of his principles, he will allow you to be defeated in order to get your attention. There is a story in the Bible, Joshua, I believe it's Joshua chapter 7. God says to Joshua, Joshua, I'm going to give you victory. The promised land is yours. Y'all remember that story? Everywhere you go, I'm going to give you victory. Nobody's going to be able to stand against you. This is your land. I'm going to do it little by little, but everybody you fight against, you're going to get victory. They go up against a small town called Ai, and God allows them to be defeated. God allows this small town to whoop them and put a good whooping on them. Because when you are outside of God's will, the enemy will and can get victory in your life. And immediately Joshua goes to God and he asks God the question. And I want you to hear me when I say this. Anytime that the enemy is winning in your life, it should make you question God as to why. God, you said the weapon would be formed, but you did not say it would prosper. Why is the weapon prospering? And the reason is that when Joshua goes to God, God says that there has been sin in the camp, and it was for their enemies to win, to bring Joshua to God so that God could reveal to Joshua that somebody in the tribe was walking outside of the will of God, that someone had done something that they were not supposed to do. And the point for me saying that to you is, I want you to understand that when God allows the enemy to get victory in an area of your life, sometimes he uses it as a mechanism to chastise you, to bring you to a place of repentance. It's for you to go to God and say, God, and it's for you to evaluate your walk with God. God, if I'm walking righteous, then God, I need you to prevail. But then sometimes God will show you, you think that you are right, but now I had to allow that to bring you to this place of repentance, to evaluate your lifestyle, to evaluate your walk. And this is what he's saying. I want you to understand that God sometimes uses means and methods to bring you to an end, and he will allow the enemy. I heard a saying, and it goes like this, that Satan is the rod of God. If that makes sense. Satan is the rod of God. That sometimes God will allow Satan to put a good whooping on you as chastening. And this is where Habakkuk, he says, God, how can the evil prevail over the righteous? And I believe God's response would have been, because the righteous have been living just like the evil men. And so I'm going to allow and it's all the way through the Bible. God allows their enemies to get triumph over them. He allows their enemies to take them into captivity. He allows their enemies to whoop them, because when you walk outside of God's will, when you walk outside of God's ways, you walk outside of God's provision, you walk outside of God's protection. And I want you to get that. Anytime you choose to go your own way, you put yourself in harm's way. Where God asks you to walk, it's protected. Where you choose you want to walk, there is consequence. And I want you to hear me when I say that. As long as you position yourself in God's ways, you stay under God's favor. But when you choose to walk outside of that, you put yourself at risk to be on attack and defeated by the enemy. And I want you to get that. He says to Habakkuk, you wouldn't believe it, because God was going to use people who were not godly to get victory over the righteous. And I want to use that to bring a point that's sometimes difficult to understand. Sometimes people discredit the message because they don't like the messenger, or they say the messenger is not spiritual enough to speak something spiritual to me. And I want you to consider that statement, because I heard an old preacher say this, that God can use a crooked stick to beat you into a straight line. In other words, we try to discredit the message of God because we don't agree with the messenger. And I want to prove this point by when Paul says, I discipline, I control my body, lest after I have preached to others, I myself be a castaway. Are you hearing what I'm saying? What he's saying is, I can preach you into heaven and be on my way to hell. It's possible for me me to give you a good message, right, while I'm living a bad message. Jesus says to his disciples, hear what they say, but don't copy what they do. And I want you to understand that sometimes people can say the right thing to you, but not be living it. And it's not for you to discredit the message that the person brings, because sometimes God will use a crooked stick to beat you back straight. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And that sometimes you have to open your ears to the message and overlook the lifestyle of the messenger so that you can receive the message. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And there's a story in the Bible. Here's David and Joab. Joab was less than noble. Joab was less than a moral man. However, when David rises in pride to take a census of the people, it is Joab who speaks to David and says to David, David, this is not a good idea. And I'm not saying that this is what David thought, but of course, if you are the king and you don't have to listen to Joab, you're not going to listen to him. But David knew his heart was pure, but Joab's heart was not as pure. And so because of that, it was easy for him to ignore the message because he discredited the morals of the messenger. But hear me, sometimes God can use a crooked message to bring you a straight message, if you hear what I'm saying. And so sometimes we have to open our ears to hear God speak to us from unlikely places. You got to be having your eyes open to see God do things from unlikely places, and you have to be able to hear God from unlikely places. And I like that it shows that God can use an evil nation to bring chastisement on his righteous people, because his righteous people were doing something that was outside of the will of God. Yes, he could have used the prophet. Yes, he could have used the men and women of God. Yes, he could have done some different things, but he chose to use the evil as an instrument of chastening for his people. And it just shows you God can use unlikely means to get you to the end that he wants you to get to. Sometimes he'll do it. Why? Because it's God. It's possible for a person to lead you into heaven while they are on their way to hell. God can give you a good message from a bad source. And I want us to be able to understand that. Sometimes when you're walking outside of God's will, you'll be at a place around some people. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he decided that he was going to change his life, but he started backsliding. He gets to the club, he's drinking, he's chasing women, he's at the strip club, and there's someone comes up to him and he says, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be somewhere. You just seem like you out of place. And it was at that moment that God gave a good message from what we would consider a bad source. But I want you to understand that God can use anybody to speak a message. He can use anybody to get his point across. He can use anybody, even the evil men, to get you somewhere that you need to be. And this is what he says to Habakkuk. Habakkuk, I'm raising up the Chaldeans. Habakkuk, I am raising up the Babylonians. I'm raising them up. Yes, they are evil. Yes, they are arrogant, but I'm going to use them. And now when we come to Habakkuk's response, I like that Habakkuk, when God gives him the answer that he don't want to hear, he takes his complaint back to God. He takes his questions to God. He takes his concerns to God. And first off, I want to point this out to you. I want to point this out.
Come on.
We have got to get out of complaining to God. We have got to get out of pouting before God. We have got to get out of that, because many times what we do is just like with the little kids. When you tell them no, they can't have something, the first thing they do is they stick their little lip out, they bow their little head, they walk around with their little attitude, and as little as they are, it is a representation of how us grown people act when God says no, or when God says wait, or when God does it a way that he wants to do it instead of you want him to do it. We got to get out of complaining. And I want you, wherever you are, if you are listening, if you are watching me online right now, in your notes, or you taking notes, you write this: I will not complain. I want you to type that: I will not complain. Stop complaining. Get this. What is the alternative to complaining? What is the alternative? Bring your concerns to God. Bring your your questions to God. It's as simple as that. You don't have to complain if you can bring your concern to God. All through the history of Israel, instead of Israel asking God why this was happening or why that was happening, they complained about what was happening. And I want you to get this. Don't complain, ask God the hard questions. Don't complain, bring God your concerns. Don't complain about it. Talk to God about it. When something happened that Habakkuk didn't understand, he didn't resort to complaining. He took his concerns to God. Here's my question. What is your response to the events in your life? Do you find yourself in your bedroom complaining about it? Do you find yourself with an attitude feeling some type of way about it? Do you find yourself bitter and upset about it? Do you find yourself all in an uproar internally about something that has happened in your life? And let me ask you this next question. Did you know that you could just talk to God about it? Did you know that the things that frustrate you, you can talk to God about it? The things that you don't understand, you can talk to God about it. The things that don't make no sense, talk to God about it. This is what the Bible says. The Bible let your request be made known to God. Let your request, are you hearing what I'm saying? We think that we only, when it says that, it's just talking about asking God for stuff. No, you can request God to give you a better understanding. You can request for God to give you a revelation. Let your request be made known unto God. Not complaint be made known unto God. Don't let your frustration, don't let that be known to God. Don't let your attitude be made known, but let your request be made known to God. I had to change my prayer life. I had to change my prayer life from having an attitude and asking God for understanding. Stop complaining and asking God for understanding. Stop being mad and start asking God for understanding. Let your request be made known. You can ask God for a better understanding. God, give me a different perspective of how to see my problems. Let me understand this. Give me wisdom to interpret this in such a way I can overcome it. You can go to God instead of ask God. Bring it to God. I want you to get that. The right way to deal with your emotions is to express them to God. So many times what we do with our emotions, we bottle them up. We hold on to them. We release them on people who don't deserve it. We take them around. We carry them around with us. But did you know that you can just take your issue to God? This is what it said. Let your request be made known to God. Get this. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding. Peace combats the emotional uproar. Are you hearing what I'm saying? The peace of God is there to combat the frustration that you've been trying to hold down. The things, the emotional issues that you have bottled up. The peace of God is there to give you a calm. When you take it to God, God knows how to handle your emotions. And this is what Habakkuk, he brings his concerns to God. Too many times you retaliate to your emotions. Too many times you try to respond to your emotions. But the Bible teaches you to bring your emotions to God respectfully, of course. But I want you to understand that the way that you have to deal with the things in your life that you don't understand, that frustrate you, that don't make sense to you, you can take them to God. Express your frustrations to God. And this is what I like. When Habakkuk expresses his concerns to God, when Habakkuk brings the things that he doesn't understand to God, when he expresses his frustration, God responds to him with encouragement and reassurance and with care. Did you notice the first 4 verses when Habakkuk talked to God, God in turn talked back to Habakkuk. And then here's what it says. Right after that, Habakkuk begins to talk to God again because God, I asked you the question and I didn't quite feel the answer that you gave me, but now I'm going back to you. I want you to hear me when I say that. And sometimes you just don't understand that you can just talk to God about it. It's called praying. It's called prayer. You can just talk to God. He takes his issue to God again. He brings it to God again and readdresses it. And I want you to get it, that sometimes God may not give you the immediate understanding, but sometimes he will give you the reassurance. And this is why I like the scripture, let your request be made known to God, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your... Sometimes God may understand it immediately, but he'll give you the peace to deal with it. Sometimes God may not give you the answer immediately, but he'll give you the peace and the reassurance to continue going the way that you're going. And this is why I love it. I love it because even in the Old Testament, we learn things about God through the stories of the old men, the men of old in the Old Testament. Habakkuk brings his issue to God. And then this is what I like, and I'm almost finished, when he says, I'm going to watch, I'm going to go to my watch, and the King James, it says, I'm going to go to my watch and watch. But if you read another version, it says, I'm going to watch and I'm going to wait. And I like that because this is what Habakkuk is saying. He's saying, I prayed to God and I expect God to give me some type of response. And I want you to get that. I like that he says, I'm going to go to my post. You can tell that he has questions, he has concerns, but he does not allow his emotions to take him over the edge. He says, I'm going to go back to what I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm going to position myself at a place of patience. I want you to hear me when I say this. Sometimes in order to receive the word from God that you ask for, it's going to take you being patient. You may have to wait for the understanding. This, as the old folks they say this, you'll understand it better by and by. That means you're going to need patience. When God don't give you the answer immediately, you have to wait on it. When God don't give you the response immediately, you have to wait on it. You may not understand it for a while, but you have to trust and believe. He says, I'm going to go to my watch. I'm going to continue on my day-to-day journey, but I'm still watching you. I'm going to continue what I know I'm supposed to do, but I'm still waiting to hear from you. And I want you to get it, that sometimes when you're waiting for God, you have to continue in the things that you're doing. Continue being obedient. Continue going about doing things the way that you're supposed to, and just wait for God. Did you know that patience is not the act of waiting? Patience is the attitude while you wait. Because you can wait and have an attitude. You can wait and be bitter. You can wait and be sad. You can wait and be annoyed. You can wait and be frustrated. But when you wait with patience, patience says, I assured that God is going to respond to my request. I'm assured that God is going to bring the understanding. I'm assured that God is going to answer my prayer. And this is where our attitude of patience comes. He said, I'm going to watch and I'm going to wait to see what he will answer to me. And let me say this as I close. I want you to know that God will respond to your, this is what they say, God will answer your prayers. God will answer your prayers. God will answer. If there was nothing else that you heard from this entire lesson, know that God will answer your prayers. I want you to type that right there. God will answer your prayers. When you pray, God will answer your prayers. And so that's all I have for you guys. I want to say, I hope something that I said was a blessing to you. I hope something that I said was a help to you. I hope something I said was an encouragement to you as you do your best to walk with God and walk in God's ways. I do want to extend the invitation. If you want to commit your life to God through Christ Jesus, you have to do wherever you are. You could say, I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and I believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, and just like that, you will be saved. And I create content just like this to help you on your walk with God. So if you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe now. These videos, this content, these sermons, these things are there to help you enhance your walk with God. So that's all I have for you. I want to say thank y'all for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If this blessed you, like the video and subscribe to our channel. I want to say thank you to the class for coming. Come on, give yourselves a hand. All right, our website, for those of you who want to become online members, if you are online, is tgm.church.org. That's tgmchurch.org. tgmchurch.org. Okay, for those of you who are online. So God bless you. I will see you guys next week. Are there any questions? Are there any additional
Thank you so much for watching, or if you're listening, I want to say thank you as well. Never miss a Bible study or a sermon when you subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, tap the bell so you never miss when I post.